Hello, my name is Jamie Tasker, and I will be presenting to you about the Texas City disaster of 1947. The explosion of ammonium nitrate fertilizer from the Grand Camp and High Flyer ships remained one of the worst industrial disasters in U.S. history in terms of casualties. Early in the morning on April 16, 1947, a small fire was spotted on the Grand Camp ship docked at Texas City, Texas, which carried flammable ammonium nitrate fertilizer. A fire hose was lowered into the hole but was not permitted to be turned on because the water would ruin the cargo. Soon after, the decision was made to try and suffocate the flames by closing all ventilations into that particular cargo hold. This was also unsuccessful. As the smoke began to billow, several hundred onlookers began to gather by the dock and observe. At around 9:12 a.m. local time, the Grand Camp exploded so ferociously that the blast was heard as far as 150 miles away, and a mushroom cloud ascended into the air more than 2,000 feet. The town was immediately devastated as tons of debris catapulted well into the main business district. As this tragedy unfolded, no one gave much thought to another ship, the High Flyer, which had become dislodged by the Grand Camp blast and collided against another vessel. A fire was also noted on this vessel, but several hours would pass without sufficient attention given to this developing situation. This ship, also packed with ammonium nitrate, exploded at about 1:10 p.m. local time, with a blast even more magnanimous than the Grand Camp. Fortunately, by this time the dock was largely evacuated, which lessened the severity of the situation. According to Kent's, Jones, and Carpenter, 468 persons perished in the blast, 63 of which were not able to be identified. Additionally, 100 persons were listed as believed missing, and no trace of their remains were ever found. Those injured numbered more than 3,500 persons, a staggering total that was the equivalent of 25% of the town's population at the time. Property loss was about $100 million, or $700 million in today's monetary value. Author's style. In his preface, Stevens writes that this book is designed to show what happened to people who were blind to the possibility of disaster and to provide explanations that may be helpful in understanding similar situations in our day and time. Stevens takes the reader through a chronological journey of the disaster, including the aftermath, which led to legislative action to ensure this disaster never occurred again. His narration style is very personal and fluid, always making sure the victim is the primary focus. Stevens notes the actions of many courageous first responders, including adjacent police and firefighters from neighboring cities, and the immediate influx of donations from across the country, which came as a result of the widespread media attention. Additionally, a large volunteer base assembled from the surrounding towns. Author's analysis. In spite of the courageousness, Stevens also emphasizes the culture of complacency surrounding emergency management at the time, which may have exacerbated the disaster. First, onlookers were not evacuated soon enough in spite of the seriousness of the situation, which drastically contributed to the casualty toll. Secondly, the immediate ship crew placed priority on the cargo, showing a complacency and/or ignorance for emergency preparedness. Had the initial crewmen doused the flames with a fire hose, the explosion would likely have been avoided. Thirdly, there did not seem to be much established coordination amongst Texas City and surrounding towns. Most of the first responders and aid came through ad hoc requests, and volunteers, while definitely courageous, were not effectively organized to ensure maximum effectiveness. Fourthly, there were inadequate medical facilities to manage the large number of casualties. And finally, there were no proper facilities to contain the deceased persons until burial arrangements could be made. Wall supports Stevens' position that those involved in emergency management had failed to be prepared for this type of disaster. Mayor Trahan of Texas City did not have an emergency operations plan by which to work from, and Stevens notes that a concerted effort to suppress the flames did not occur until 48 hours after the initial blast. Fairling, however, offers a different perspective. Fairling depicts emergency management response as a success. Nearby Galveston, Texas, activated their emergency plan and immediately sent doctors and nurses to the scene. The Red Cross arrived at the disaster within 70 minutes, and a nearby Army base set up a mobile surgical hospital. Firefighters and students from more than 40 towns arrived to help throughout the day. While there are differing pictures about the response efforts, there is no debate about the precipitating issues leading up to the disaster. Almost everyone involved with the Grand Cayman High Flyer ships were censured, and a U.S. Coast Guard review found that there was insufficient knowledge on behalf of the crews about the dangerous materials inside the cargo and about emergency procedures. Some even blamed the government because the ammonium nitrate was to be sent to post-war Europe at the request of the government. The government, according to Stevens, sought to blame everyone else and denied responsibility for the disaster. In subsequent lawsuits, the government was originally found to be at fault, but this was eventually overturned by federal courts and finally the Supreme Court. Legislative actions followed next. Congressman Clark Thompson led the charge to make a special appropriations bill to compensate victims of the disaster, leading to about $17 million in relief. Finally, as a result of this disaster, the Civil Protection Act of 1951 was passed by the Texas legislature, which put into place a more consistent policy toward the management of disasters. In addition, local coordination was strengthened, firefighting capabilities improved, and inspections of ship cargo were more closely scrutinized and regulated. That concludes my presentation about the Texas City disaster of 1947. Any questions or comments can be directed to me, and I will answer them on Blackboard. Thank you.